everyone, this is Rabbi Roger coming to you from God's beautiful country, Israel. Before I do a program, I approach it in one of two ways. Either I get a passing thought that usually stirs within me for a few days, or I ask God directly, what does He want me to talk on? In this case, I had been praying about something, and I eventually had the thought, why do we call the Old and New sections of the Bible a testament rather than a covenant? Can you yourself answer that question? After all, Jeremiah 31 through 33 states, Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law, which should be translated as my teachings and instructions, within them and their heart, and I will write it, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Well, what I did not realize is that I was about to get into something beyond my bailiwick. Why do I say that? Because I'm not a historian and do not claim to know church history as some may. So, with my limited understanding, I decided to ask AI questions rather than studying the topic itself. This, to me, is one of the downfalls that AI has, affording the ability to learn without learning, if that makes sense. I have been using BibleChat.co for some time. It bases its answers from the Bible and not a worldly view. I still have some reserves with AI altogether, which holds me back from using it like some might for sermons or books. I use it in part for understanding words or meanings between words, like I did with today's teaching. At this point, I would like to make it clear, as convenient as AI has become, it still is not the ultimate authority or advisor. It is more of a convenience, as if someone was in the room with you and you were having a conversation with them. But God is still the ultimate source and teacher. He tells us in 1 John 2:27, As for you, the anointing which you received from Him abides in you, and you have no need for anyone to teach you. But as His anointing teaches you about all things, and is true and is not a lie, and just as it has taught you, you abide in Him. So with that, let us dive into the interview. So I started by asking it, what is the difference in the meaning between covenant and testament, such as New Covenant or New Testament?
A covenant is a solemn agreement or promise between two parties, often involving commitments and responsibilities. In a biblical context, it typically refers to the agreements God made with His people, outlining the relationship between God and humanity. Covenants in the Bible include significant agreements such as the Noahic covenant, Genesis 9 verses 8 to 17, the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3, Genesis 15 verses 1 to 21, the Mosaic covenant, Exodus 19 to 24, the Davidic covenant, 2 Samuel 7, the New covenant, Jeremiah 31 verses 31 to 34, Luke 22 verse 20. Covenants are often characterized by promises, stipulations, and the consequences of breaking the agreement. They establish a relationship and are binding commitments. A testament refers to a declaration or statement of one's beliefs, often in written form. In the context of the Bible, it signifies a collection of writings that bear witness to particular beliefs or teachings. The term New Testament refers to the collection of books in the Christian Bible that document the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, as well as the early church's teachings. The Old Testament refers to the Hebrew Scriptures, while the New Testament includes the teachings of the New Covenant established by Jesus. It is more about the written record of the faith and teachings rather than an agreement itself. Covenant emphasizes the relational aspect and commitments between God and His people, while Testament emphasizes the written record or declaration of beliefs. The New Covenant refers to the promise of salvation through Jesus Christ, while the New Testament refers to the body of writings that document that covenant and the teachings of Jesus. Understanding these distinctions helps clarify the theological concepts and the structure of the Bible.
When did the word testament first come into use?
The term testament in the context of the Bible has its roots in the Latin word testamentum, which translates to covenant in English. The use of testament to refer to the two main divisions of the Christian Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, developed over time. By the time of the early church fathers, Old Testament and New Testament were commonly used to refer to the Hebrew Scriptures and the writings about Jesus and the early church, respectively. The distinction emphasized the new covenant established through Jesus Christ. The formalization of the term Testament, as it relates to the Bible, became more widespread during the Middle Ages and has remained in use in most Christian traditions to this day. In summary, while the concept of covenant has been present in the biblical text since ancient times, the specific term testament, as a designation for the divisions of the Bible, became established in the early centuries of the Christian Church, particularly influenced by Latin translations.
Is there a difference between the word covenant and testament?
Yes, there is a distinction between the words covenant and testament, even though they are often used interchangeably in the context of the Bible. Here's a breakdown of the differences. A covenant is a binding agreement or promise between two parties. In the biblical context, it often refers to the solemn agreements God made with His people, which include specific promises, stipulations, and responsibilities. Covenants are relational and involve commitments from both parties. They establish a framework for the relationship between God and humanity. Examples of covenants in the Bible include the Noahic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and the Davidic covenant. The term testament refers to a written statement or declaration of beliefs. In the context of the Bible, it signifies a collection of writings that bear witness to particular beliefs or teachings. While the New Testament includes the teachings of the New Covenant established by Jesus, it is primarily a record of the faith and teachings of the early church. It emphasizes the documentation of God's revelation and the teachings of Jesus, rather than being an agreement itself. The terms Old Testament and New Testament categorize the two main sections of the Christian Bible, with the Old Testament containing the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament containing writings about Jesus and the early church. Covenant emphasizes the relational aspect and commitments within a binding agreement, while testament emphasizes the written record or declaration of beliefs. The New Covenant refers to the promise of salvation through Jesus Christ, while the New Testament refers to the body of writings that document that covenant and the teachings of Jesus. While St. Jerome used testamentum in the Latin Vulgate, which translated the Hebrew word for covenant, the distinction between the two terms remains important in understanding their respective meanings and implications within the biblical context.
Since a covenant is a binding relationship, then is a testament like a contract which can be broken? It is important to clarify the distinctions between covenant and testament, especially in a biblical context, as they carry different connotations.
Covenants in the Bible are considered sacred and are not meant to be broken lightly. They often include promises from God to His people and stipulations for how the people should respond. For example, the Mosaic covenant includes laws and commandments that the Israelites were to follow. Biblical covenants are often seen as enduring commitments. For instance, God's covenant with Noah after the flood, Genesis 9 verses 8 to 17, is presented as everlasting. While a testament can be viewed as a formal declaration, similar to a contract, it does not carry the same relational depth as a covenant. The New Testament documents the teachings of Jesus and the early church but does not function as a binding agreement in the same way a biblical covenant does. The terms Old Testament and New Testament refer to the collections of writings that reflect God's revelation and the relationship with humanity, rather than serving as contracts that can be broken. A testament is a written record or declaration of beliefs and teachings, which can be likened to a formal statement, but does not carry the same relational depth. In summary, while there might be some similarities in the idea of agreements, the biblical concept of covenant is much richer and more relational than the idea of a testament as a mere written contract.
Okay, I understand that much better. Although, if there is a slight difference between the two, why is the word testament used and not the word covenant? After all, the one is much more descriptive and personal versus the other.
That's a great question. The choice of the term testament instead of covenant in the context of the Bible, particularly in the titles Old Testament and New Testament, can be attributed to several historical and theological factors. The original Greek word used in the New Testament is diatheke, which can mean both covenant and testament. In some contexts, it refers to a will or testament, which may explain why testament was chosen in this context. The dual meaning of diatheke allowed for a broader interpretation, theological considerations, emphasis on witness, The term testament also conveys the idea of bearing witness to God's actions and faithfulness. It reflects the idea that these writings testify to the truth of God's promises and the work of Jesus, serving as a witness to believers. While covenant is indeed more descriptive of the relational aspect, the use of testament has historical roots in translation and theological emphasis on the written record and witness of God's revelation. Both terms are important in understanding the biblical narrative, but they highlight different aspects of God's interaction with humanity.
So, then is it safe to say this is more of a Western mindset rather than an Eastern mindset?
Yes, you can say that the use of the terms testament and covenant, as well as the understanding of their meanings, reflects some differences between Western and Eastern mindsets, particularly in the context of biblical interpretation and theology. Here are a few points to consider. The Western tradition often emphasizes legal and contractual language, which can lead to a focus on the formal aspects of agreements. The term testament may resonate with this mindset, suggesting a written declaration or agreement, similar to a legal document. Western thought tends to emphasize individualism and personal relationships, which can influence how concepts like covenant are understood. The idea of a testament as a personal declaration may align with this focus. The historical development of Christianity in the West, particularly through the influence of the Latin Vulgate and the Church Fathers, has shaped the terminology and understanding of these concepts. In contrast, Eastern cultures often place a stronger emphasis on relational dynamics and community. The concept of covenant, with its focus on mutual commitments and relationships, may resonate more deeply in an Eastern context. Eastern traditions often value narrative and oral storytelling, which may influence how sacred texts are understood and transmitted. The relational aspect of covenants may be more prominent in these traditions. Eastern thought tends to be more holistic, viewing concepts as interconnected rather than compartmentalized. This can lead to a broader understanding of covenant, as encompassing both relational and legal aspects. In summary, the distinction between testament and covenant can reflect a Western mindset that emphasizes legal and contractual language, while an Eastern mindset may focus more on relational dynamics and community. Both perspectives provide valuable insights into understanding the biblical narrative and the nature of God's relationship with humanity.
Can you drill down on the Western mindset's historical development and how we lost the Eastern way of thinking?
The historical development of the Western mindset, particularly in relation to the understanding of biblical concepts like testament and covenant, has been influenced by various cultural, philosophical, and theological shifts over centuries. Here's a breakdown of how this shift occurred and how it may have led to a different understanding compared to the Eastern way of thinking. 1. Early Christianity and Eastern roots. Christianity began in the Eastern Mediterranean, rooted in Jewish culture and thought. Early Christians, including the apostles, were influenced by Hebrew scriptures, which emphasized covenantal relationships with God. In the early church, teachings were often transmitted orally, reflecting a communal and relational approach to faith. The emphasis was on living out the covenantal relationship with God. 2. Hellenistic influence. As Christianity spread into the Greco-Roman world, it encountered Hellenistic philosophy, which emphasized reason, individualism, and abstract thinking. This philosophical framework began to influence Christian thought and interpretation. The incorporation of Greek legal concepts led to a more contractual understanding of faith. The idea of testament, as a written declaration, resonated with this legalistic approach, emphasizing formal agreements over relational dynamics. 3. Development of doctrine. Early theologians such as Augustine and others began to articulate Christian doctrine using philosophical and legal language. This included a focus on salvation as a legal transaction, justification, rather than primarily as a relational restoration. The translation of the Bible into Latin by St. Jerome solidified the use of testamentum instead of covenant, further embedding the legalistic and contractual understanding into Western Christianity.
Seems like we're out of time today, but come back and listen to the second half of this different and amazing interview with our virtual friend. If you would like to learn to say the Hebrew prayers without ever learning Hebrew, then go to branchofisrael.com. This is Rabbi Roger, and thank you so much for listening. Lahit Rhodes, goodbye, or see you again.